This has to do with California earthquakes. It's just been revealed from yesterday's article. Southern California earthquakes increased the stress on major fault lines. If you see one of the videos I posted today having to do with the Loma Prieta earthquake 30 years later, that's by USGS, they're saying that these earthquakes do affect their neighboring faults. We heard from the geologists right after Ridgecrest earthquakes, July 4th and 5th, that the nearby San Andreas and the other faults were not affected. That's not so. They were affected. They were jostled. Now, this is also a finding that the geologists have come out with just yesterday, October 30th, 2019, University of Iowa study on Science Daily. This new study has found that last summer's Ridgecrest earthquakes in Southern California, earthquakes increased stress on the Garlock Fault, which has been dormant for at least 100 years. The University of Iowa-led study has found that a series of Southern California earthquakes last summer, we're talking about July, increased stress on the Garlock Fault, a major earthquake fault, the line that has been dormant for at least a century. Okay, it was right there. You know, it's locked and it's locked in. First of all, San Andreas is running northwest southeast, and 90 degrees to that, the Garlock Fault is locked in around the area of Los Angeles, going towards the east towards Ridgecrest. And there it finds the Walker Lane fault system. It's made up of thousands of faults. It acts like one fault, and the Walker Lane has a lot of high-threat volcanoes on there, and it goes from Ridgecrest all the way up to the Cascadia Arc, and is pushing along the Cascadia Arc, and it wants to push Cascadia north. Now, 75% of the subduction pressure is taken up by San Andreas Fault. The other 25%, for the most part, is taken up by Walker Lane fault system. Now, those two are parallel to each other, San Andreas and Walker Lane, and they're joined underneath, like a big U-shaped, with Garlock Fault, which is right at Ridgecrest. And let's remember that Ridgecrest is on a volcanic field, a causal volcanic field. Now, the researchers used satellite imagery, in this case, and seismic instruments to map the effects of the Ridgecrest earthquakes, a sequence that began with the magnitude 6.4 foreshock in the Mojave Desert on July 4th, before the magnitude 7.1 earthquake that struck the next day. In all, there were more than 100,000 aftershocks stemming from the twin earthquakes. The analysis by Bill Barnhart, geodesist at Iowa, and researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey showed the Ridgecrest earthquakes and aftershocks caused a seismic creep, A-S-E-I-S-M-I-C, a seismic creep, along a 12 to 16 mile section of the Garlock Fault, which runs east to west for 185 miles from the San Andreas Fault to Death Valley and perpendicular to the Ridgecrest earthquake region. The aseismic creep tells us the Garlock Fault is sensitive to stress changes, and that stress is increased across only a limited area of the fault, says Barnhart, assistant professor at the University of Iowa Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences and corresponding author on the study, published in the journal Geophysical Research Letters. He says, so if, and that's a big if, this area were to slip in a future earthquake, we are showing where that might happen. The Ridgecrest earthquakes and aftershocks led to ruptures on the surface and below ground right up to the Garlock Fault. Other than the one stress section on the Garlock Fault identified by the research team, the remaining 165 or so miles of the fault actually showed decreased stress from Ridgecrest seismic activity. Barnhart says that is good news. A seismic creep is a slip on the fault that does not produce the shaking or seismic waves associated with earthquakes. Creep on the Garlock Fault followed the Ridgecrest earthquakes was shallow, occurring from the surface to around 300 feet below ground. The Garlock Fault has not produced large earthquakes since instrument keeping began, at least a century, but is considered a potential seismic risk to Southern California. The Garlock Fault has been quiet for a long time, Barnhart says, but there's a geologic evidence that there have been large earthquakes on it. It's a major fault line. Actually, it's the second largest fault in California. Barnhart's team says the stress section could be capable of producing an earthquake between magnitude 6.7 to magnitude 7.0 if it ruptured. It would be an earthquake of the magnitude of the Ridgecrest sequence, Barnhart said. That means it would be big. You'd feel some swaying in Los Angeles, but it wouldn't be a magnitude 7.8 that could be more damaging. A seismic creep triggered on faults by nearby earthquakes in Southern California are relatively common and do not necessarily lead to earthquakes, Barnhart says. Another analysis of the Ridgecrest earthquakes published this month in the journal Science reached the same general conclusion about the effects of the Ridgecrest tremblers. Barnhart's study, though, identifies a longer stretch of the Garlock Fault that has slipped and gives a physical explanation for why the slip happened. The USGS and Southern California Earthquake Center funded this research. And this is from University of Iowa, journal reference William D. Barnhart, Gavin P. Hayes, Ryan D. Gold, the July 2019 Ridgecrest California Earthquake Sequence, Kinematics of Slip and Stressing in Cross-Section Ruptures. And I'll leave a link below for you for this on Science Daily. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.